Hello, this is a review of the final chapter of A Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnett. So that's part 4, chapter 4, I believe. I've just finished it as of half an hour ago. And I'm okay if I don't think about it. But let's start at the beginning. Firstly, I need to eat my words because as satisfying as it was to read about Sibylla going to accuse Andrew Hunter of the 4 times that he tried to kill Richard, I will admit that I was wrong that Andrew Hunter probably doesn't have as much of an involvement in Lymond's backstory as I thought. I thought Andrew Hunter was going to have something to do with the fact that he blew up the convent accidentally and was looking for a scapegoat and is using Lymond, and so it's been in Andrew Hunter's interest to keep Lymond guilty. But that's, I think I've credited Mr. Hunter with far too much intelligence and wits. Although he's not dumb, that's for sure. But he was dumb enough to think he could woo Mariota. Like, I mean, as a part of me that thinks Andrew Hunter is really just trying to get Mariota's money. I don't know. Clearly, he's alive at the end of this book. He's gone into England and he's about to learn that Lymond has been proclaimed innocent, and he's going to be sitting in England thinking it'll be okay because Lymond will die, and he's going to get the news of Lymond's innocence and he's going to be thinking, oh crap. I hope he's thinking that. I really love the beginning of this chapter, how Dorothy Dunnett just starts it talking about death and the cheapness of life and the quickness of death and how that renders everything kind of absurd. I love that. This is page 483. And then after she talks about people dying from week to week, month to month, their disappearance had to be accepted, death was cheap and quick, then she sort of twists that around, because I thought she was just making a general philosophical statement. No, but she turns that around on its head and said, there's one death that will not go unnoticed, and that's the death of Lymond. I was like, oh, ouch. But many in Edinburgh lost fathers or brothers at Solway Moss. So a lot of people throughout Scotland who've lost so much from Solway Moss in 42, I believe it was, know the name of Lymond, or Francis Crawford, and know that he has been labelled a traitor. It is common knowledge, which we kind of knew because, I mean, the very first lines of this book is Lymond is back. And we get in those lines that on page 11, which is actually the first page of the book, it's all about there are busy men that Lymond is in Scotland is said with disgust and a side-slipping look at one of their number. Or a woman's voice would say it with a different note and then a laugh a little. So that's very much kind of a similarity between the beginning of the very first chapter, the opening gambit, and the last chapter. But it's very Dunnett-esque to go from talking about this existential nature of life and how anticlimactic death often is, to suddenly, oh no, there is one death that everyone is waiting for. Perfect setup to the chapter. And so it's announced that he's back in Edinburgh and he's going to be standing for this trial on the 8th day of the month of August, which was just so you guys can get an understanding. I was reading this on the 8th of August. It is today. It is the 13th of August because I haven't had a chance to finish the entire chapter in that time, but I was reading this trial on the 8th of August. Anyway, so the news had reached Will Scott, this is on page 484, where he hung about in a frenzy of inactivity. Once again, it is like just the juxtaposition of frenzy and inactivity, and how Dorothy Dunnett combines 2 opposite words into a sentence that just create more meaning than what those 2 words alone can create by themselves. But I can imagine Will is just feeling very restless in this moment. I was feeling restless, like extremely restless. I was only slightly less restless because I knew that Sibylla had at least done something. But going back to the thing with Sibylla and Andrew Hunter. So yes, okay. Andrew did send the jewellery, but for reasons that were a little less manipulative than I first thought. Catherine Hunter, what a weird character. Top of page 492, she's crying just as she's getting carried down the stairs, and as Sibylla has just told Catherine that Andrew is, like, banished and he's not coming back. I don't know what she's crying about. A part of me thinks, are they tears of actual pain that her remaining son is now not going to be seen by her again, combined with the fact that she's so full of pride and sort of like this really fragile, evil ego, and that is going to be shattered because of Andrew's behaviour. Is she crying about herself? Is she crying about her son? I think that's unclear. And I love that not everything is settled by the end of this book, that we don't have a full explanation. I don't like getting explanations because, well, I like this book, so clearly I don't like getting actual explanations. No one here watching this video likes books that gives explanations. I didn't get this at first when I read this, but this is on page 492 as well, when Sibylla has come back to the house, her own house at Midcoulter, and has the chest of Andrew Hunter with all of the, I assume, borderline treasonous deeds. So we don't get an explanation of what's in that chest in this book. Like, that's not fully explained. Richard even says, do you want to publish them? And Sibylla says no. The thing I don't understand is at the very end of that little section on page 492, the Dowager's expression changed. "Only 5 days," exclaimed his mother. "How could I be hard on her?" I think Sibylla is referring to how could she be hard on Catherine Hunter, because Sibylla herself is coping with the fact that one of her children is going to be dead in 5 days, so how could she be hard on another mother? I didn't understand what she was referring to there. I personally can't imagine this family, Richard, Mariotta, Sibylla, going to Edinburgh days leading up to what they must feel, what we all felt was the inevitable murder, hanging, it's murder, yeah, of state murder, is still murder, of Lymond, and just the intensity of the emotions that they must have been feeling. Like, it's nauseating to think about it. And then we find out that there's going to be like a pre-trial so that Lymond, because they just think Lymond's going to sit up there with his verbal lashing tongue and lay it all out for them in ways that it is going to mean that state secrets could be spilled. So they're having this pre-trial, and Lymond walks in, this is page 495, unobtrusive, beautiful clothes, fine hands, a burnished head with a long firm mouth and heavy blue eyes, spaciously set. But all the signs were there. He had been ill. I'm assuming he's extremely anemic from the blood loss. Unless he actually has wounds on his face, because if he has wounds all over his torso, his face was spared. That would have been noted down though. There's no way Dorothy Dunnett would make a mark on Lymond's face. I say that now. There's 5 more books to go. He could easily get scarred, but I feel like Dorothy Dunnett's, she's just going to be thinking, I can't touch this angelic face. If Lymond gets wounded, it happens from here down. We appreciate that, Dunnett, we do. What was confusing to me was that they dropped all the charges that Lymond had against his family, like the attempted murder of Richard, etc. That's all dropped, and I'm assuming because somehow Sibylla has come forward with Richard with the information from Andrew Hunter, but that's not actually explicitly stated here, and I'm just like, because it says here on page 496, these charges are not being pursued. It would have just been nice if it was stated they're not being pursued because of recent evidence. Like, Andrew Hunter was not mentioned at all here, so as far as I'm aware, it's unclear to me whether or not these charges were dropped because of the Andrew Hunter ordeal, or because the court has just decided there's so much going on, we don't need to go through everything, we'll just go through the treasonous stuff and ignore the sort of domestic stuff. I don't know. So that's unclear if anyone knows about Andrew Hunter being such a baddie, except for the Coulters at the moment. And that's okay. I am expecting, of all my wild predictions, this is my least wild, and that is that Lymond is going to meet Andrew Hunter again in the future. and there are going to be words exchanged, and I hope more than words. I don't think Lymond would be the sort to murder Andrew Hunter unless Andrew started saying something about Eloise or Christian, which I think is quite possible. We all know that Lymond has like a few switches, and one of them is insulting a woman that he likes. He's not that unpredictable, really. So we go through all of the charges of Lymond's charges here, and it was good. I read this twice because I just wanted to fully understand the chronology of all of the charges, because I was a bit confused about exactly where it is, but I think reading this and also reading the Now You Have Done It blog has sorted that out in my head. It was a little bit confusing because we were in this Henry Lauder's mind the entire time, who is a character mentioned at the very beginning. Henry Lauder of St. Germain's, Lord Advocate to the Queen. His character mentioned at the very beginning, and it seems like I initially thought he was just like a big baddie who wanted to get back at Lymond the whole time, but it seems like he's kind of just, he likes the battle of minds, the back and forth, and then when he finds out that Lymond is rather articulate and sardonic, because it's mentioned here that when Lymond was called forth, oh my gosh, I loved that on 495 where they called him, the name reverberated through the rafters, Lymond, Lymond, master, master. And the boy Scott jumped and the brother Coulter moved also. I can just imagine his name being called and then the footsteps of him coming. This is such a good scene for a movie or a TV show. Such a lost joy this book is. But yes, so then Lymond starts to identify himself, and Henry Lauder is so impressed with how effortlessly audible and clear and professionally pitched his voice is, that we immediately can see that Henry Lauder he's really in it for the back and forth, the legal proceedings and proof and disproof and character assassinations, etc. Which made me kind of like him, because he seemed to be playing in his mind devil's advocate to incriminate Lymond. I mean, that was a natural position for him to be in, because I think anyone who was a judge and didn't really know much about Lymond except for what has been said would have to be biased to thinking that Lymond is guilty. So it's really hard to blame Henry Lauder for how hard he was on Lymond, yet I was annoyed at Henry for just being like that. I was like, oh, it was like one of those things where it's so frustrating to read, but you just have to keep reading and you just want to tear the pages from the book. So satisfying when John Maxwell or John Aries just kind of, in a very nonchalant kind of way, just completely supports Francis, like entirely just throws his support behind him and compliments him and saying how brilliant of a leader he is, but doesn't say it in a way that's like he's innocent or I really like him. He just sort of states facts. So like John Maxwell isn't incriminating himself in the event that Lymond gets hanged, which John Maxwell surely must have been thinking is going to happen at this point, but also describes Lymond in a respectful way, and a way that would make him subtly look better to the judges, because if most of the people there would probably respect John Maxwell, and then for John Maxwell to praise Lymond's leadership, that's quite powerful, and no one was expecting it. I love it how like every now and then there were murmurs in the audience when they were surprised or shocked. I could really feel that I was there at the moment. 499 after John Maxwell spoke. First blood miraculously to the panel. Nice. Love it. John Maxwell is like up there with my favorite characters. Even though we get so little of him. I hope he is in the future books. Something tells me he isn't going to be, because I've now since learnt that apparently John Maxwell and Agnes have 12 kids or something together. He keeps himself busy. That's all I'm saying. Throughout this whole time, Lymond does not break his public persona. He continues to goad, he continues to play with words, he continues to kind of poke fun of people. For example, when he says, "I was carried away," on page 502, "by the strange charm of your reasoning." Or on page 508, "Unpleasing as it may seem to Mr. Lauder's active imagination, there was nothing but friendship between us." It's just a little goad at, like, basically saying, "Mr. Lauder, you have a dirty mind. You are making this up in your mind. None of it was true. Stop projecting your desires onto me and attributing them to me," is basically what Lymond is saying. I also loved George Douglas sticking up for Lymond, which kind of surprised me, because as satisfying as it was, George has no reason to do that. And if anything, it could be bad for George for him to say that, because it looks almost, he didn't really support Lymond, but he definitely said words that were in Lymond's favour. For example, when George was trying to explain on page 508 why Lymond was actually offering himself up in exchange for Christian, because no one could really believe that Lymond would do that. Why would a treasonous person give his life up for a woman? And George Douglas gave the reasoning straight up. So I respected George for doing that, but I do wonder, I'm like, wow. Because George must have known that Lymond was going to die here, so there was no reason for him to defend him. So deep down, somewhere in George's psyche, in his character, there is a little ounce of something. It's either respect or goodness. I'm not going to say goodness, but maybe respect, that has made him say that about Lymond in a public forum. I very much liked on the top of page 506, because Lymond getting accused of, on everything, of now being the messenger who was going to deliver the messenger to Grey and Wharton about the young queen escaping to France. Lymond says on top of 506, "Am I not an unlikely messenger?" And I was like, yes, that is such a good point. He's such an unlikely messenger to be trusted with that message at the time. And he goes on to explain, "Anyone in English pay in Scotland will know me as an enemy of Lord Grey and Lord Wharton and the Earl of Lennox. I'm also the object of a well-publicised pursuit by my brother." Exactly. Who in their right mind would give Lymond that message? Who in their right mind? So that was just so satisfying, because Lymond was like, "Have you tried to actually think about what you are accusing me of?" Lymond must be thinking of these people being like, how are they so short-sighted? And we'll get to that, because he has some great lines at the end, which basically tied this whole story for me together, was when Lymond gave his little speech just before he was taken out at the very end. So yeah, Lord knows this whole time just trying to make Lymond lose his cool, which is like a running theme in this book. Everyone just wants Lymond to crack, and Henry Lauder is no different. And we totally can sympathise with that, Henry. We all want to see Lymond crack, but why did you have to do it now? Lymond on the bottom of 507 with his, because, you know, Christian did die. And I've spoken about this before, in Lymond's pursuit of innocence and being proven innocent and not guilty of being a spy and treason, people have died. More people than I think are mentioned in this book, because of he had that fight between the English at Heriot. Many men must have died then, or been wounded. And Matt, and now Christian. And he has made mistakes, including the one where it ended with his sister's death, but his words here sort of sum up how despondent and suicidal he gets. This is bottom of 507. "These were unprincipled and unpardonable acts, and you can't possibly blame me as much as I blame myself." So here he's talking about how much he blames himself for continuing to make contact with Christian when he didn't have to. He wanted to, I think, because he genuinely might have thought Christian could help him, but also I think he wanted to see Christian, and was very much curious and intrigued by her, and loved their conversations. The one person in the book that we've ever seen that can keep up with his poetry and his allusions to very esoteric things. It might not have been so esoteric back in the day, but they are to us now, some 500 years later. So this quote about how much he's blaming himself is also, I don't think he means to do this, because I think he is resigned to death at this point, especially considering what we read in the next few pages. It seems like he knew no matter what he was going to say that he was going to die. So his main goal here was at least trying not to get anyone else incriminated, like Richard, who we'll get to that in a second. But when he says, "You can't possibly blame me as much as I blame myself," he's not only telling people, admitting that it was a mistake to continue seeing Christian, he's also showing a side of his character that I don't think anyone here at the court, the 12 people here that were judging him, expected to see. And that is that he's expressing a deep remorse here. And someone that is expressing such a remorse, you would think that would plant a little bit of a seed that this person might not actually be all bad, and that this whole thing could be a mistake and he could be being blamed for something that he had no hand in. He's showing a side of his character, which is what we think is his true character, that definitely makes one think perhaps this man was framed of all of this, or at least adds to the pile of doubt, which is a very small pile at this point. But I think he did a good job in a very subtle way of just showing his character. Will leaving suddenly when he heard about Palmer did confuse me, and I feel like I've missed something, and I will probably figure it out on reread, because I was just thinking, why on earth was Will so keen to go to Palmer? And did Will know that there was a chance that the papers that exonerated Lymond in the end would be with Palmer? And the answer is yeah, he did know that, but I totally missed that completely. And then we find out later it's because after he was playing with Jonathan Crouch, he found out that Palmer was Harvey's cousin or something like that. And that when Samuel Harvey died, his stuff was transferred over to Palmer because he was his cousin. And Will Scott knew that also through the grapevine. And Will also knew that Palmer liked playing the tarot card game because Crouch had told him. So this scene, pre the Ostrich Inn with Jonathan Crouch, has come full circle. But I didn't get that when I was reading this. I had to wait for the full explanation. I was just like, Will, why are you doing such a Lymond-esque move by just doing something so unpredictable and going to play a card game with someone at a really crucial time? It was such a Lymond move. Will is he's really learning. Scene with Tom Palmer. Tom Palmer is a bit weird in the head, not gonna lie. Like, he doesn't seem to care. Not that Tom Palmer would care about the letters from Lymond, but also it's just the surprise at having the... I don't know what I really thought about this, because I'm in two minds, really. It makes sense that the letters that Christian had Samuel Harvey write and co-signed and witnessed, it makes sense that they are the thing that result in Lymond's innocence, because, well, we had a character die for that, and Christian's whole character arc is so much more satisfying if that's the case, but kind of not really, because I like the idea of Christian's efforts being for nothing, and that perhaps we could have ended this book with Lymond, instead of being proven innocent in the extremely satisfying and obvious way that it was at the end. I wonder if it would have been slightly more in the book style, to end with his innocence being not proven, but he wasn't proven guilty, and so they didn't have enough evidence either way, so they just proclaimed him neither innocent or guilty. And how much issue that would have caused then with the general population finding that out. And it would have been quite satisfying to have Lymond use his words to prove his innocence entirely. I feel like we were kind of robbed of that scene with these letters coming to light. So I was kind of expecting, because he was doing such a good job, I thought, with everyone else supporting him, because surely if he's suddenly been proven borderline innocent of every other crime that he's been accused of, surely that must be planting a hell of a lot of doubt into the minds of everyone, of all of the judges, thinking, well, hang on, if he's innocent of all those other things, or potentially at least not obviously guilty, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to be accusing him of the guiltiness of being a spy around Solway Moss. And it could be to our detriment if we accuse him of being guilty, because that means that the real spy is out there on the loose still, and we have just hung an innocent man. And we will no longer be looking for them. So we were kind of robbed of all of that in a very neat package. And I think because I hadn't put together the whole connection with Palmer, I knew there was something up with Palmer, because I'm like, what's the point of him getting taken in at the very end? And he kept on popping up. So I think I just wasn't paying attention to the scenes that he was in, or paying enough attention to the Douglases, because the Douglases must have had something to do with, maybe George Douglas knew that Palmer had that letter, and George Douglas was going to get it and bring it the next day. No. I mean, if one of the Douglases out there has managed to switch the blank letters that Christian got out with the real letter from Samuel Harvey, someone knows that. So someone knows that someone still knows that Lymond is innocent and made no moves to have that come to light. Who was that? Someone in the Douglases? And if so, did George Douglas know that, and then he spoke up for Lymond, knowing that Lymond was innocent, speaking out of guilt, like his own conscience, because he knew that he had the power to have Lymond's innocence proved? I don't know, these are all just speculative thoughts, but there's still something fishy about how miraculously they were just there. Someone has done something to switch them, and someone knows that they've been switched out, and that person is who? I don't know. I don't know. It's not that I dislike really neat endings, because this was a very beautiful and very satisfying ending, extremely satisfying. I just wasn't expecting it to be so satisfying with how this whole book has, the whole style of this book is that you're always constantly being like, why did you say that, Lymond, when you could have just done this? Why? And the ending was just uncharacteristically satisfying is what I'm trying to say, and too neat, and there's still something a little fishy about it. I'm sorry, but Lymond's comment on Henry VIII and on the bottom of 517, I cracked up. Europe's most Christian bachelor and I had nothing in common. He had a fancy to control my tongue and also to restrain his niece. So funny. So funny. I'm glad we got an explanation of Lymond's stay in England and what happened there. I did have to read it twice, and I did have to go to the Now You Have Done It blog to figure out the exact chronology of his capture after Solway and what happened after that, getting off to France, being a slave, getting freed by his dealings with Lennox. And I did like that Lymond scattered in his elements of how good he was at trying to help Scotland, you know, like stealing Wharton's force, stealing the Earl of Lennox's money back. I like that he did all of these good things and explained all of these good things, but scattered among that, he also kind of admitted, yeah, well, it's true that I kind of helped Lennox out a bit because I wanted to at least escape from the galleys. He kind of admits that that was a little bit selfish on his part, especially because he knew that Lennox was about to betray Scotland. It's not like Lymond shies away from admitting that he does have selfish elements about his character, and that is such an honest, like, his honesty is so refreshing. And we've always known throughout this book that Lymond, he detests people who are dishonest or sort of curtail their character by leaving out the bad bits and only saying the good bits. But Lymond puts it all in there, and even though it might not make him look good, at least it makes him look honest, and that's all he wants. And that's true to all of his character quirks as well, in hating dishonesty in others, that he walks the walk. I have two favorite parts of this chapter. Honestly, you know what? The first favorite part of my chapter here is actually my favorite part of the book, in terms of just absolute respect for the character of Lymond, but respect for Dunnett herself, and how she has woven into Lymond's character a trait that I have been so desperately looking for in any character across any form of entertainment, book or otherwise. And I finally got it here on page 531. That is Lymond's, because what's happened is Lymond has decided not to defend himself further. He's plead his innocence, and instead he just goes on to talk about a borderline related topic about patriotism. Richard standing up and putting his support so firmly behind Lymond to the point that he's going to incriminate himself if Lymond is found guilty, and Lymond is just like on 528, "Don't labour the point, Richard." Breaks my heart. And then Richard said briefly he is not guilty, and Lymond's just like, oh. Lymond, who is like resigned to his own death, is only trying to help Richard, and Richard doesn't help himself, and Lymond is just like, this is the shittest day of my life. It's probably not, actually. This thing about his sister's reputation, and how as soon as they started talking about Eloise, and there was a suggestion that potentially Lymond wanted to kill Eloise to cover up some sort of scandal, and then Lymond so cleverly uses that in order to say that Richard doesn't know what he's saying, he's just trying to protect my sister's reputation, that's all. Lymond always says that's all. There was another time he said that's all. Damn it, where was it? It was really early in the book. It's when he makes such a good point, he just puts that's all at the end of it, kind of like when the devil wears Prada. What's her name? I'm going to get that scene and put it here right now.
Which exposed the exploitation.
That's all. That's all.
But it's just so clever how Lymond, after Richard has basically done a silly thing and is now going to possibly get in trouble for supporting a treasonous traitor, Lymond just says it's only because he's trying to protect my sister's reputation. Which I think he's such a quick thinker. I would not think of this. Damn it. Just so impressed by Lymond, okay? I'm allowed to be impressed. I don't need to explain it all. He's just better than me. I get it. Okay, thoughts about this? Because one of my craziest predictions ever, and this is a spoiler for people who've not read the book, because unfortunately I think I've been spoiled myself. So I'm going to put a spoiler thing across the screen, and when this ends, you can now unmute me. But mute me now. I had this crazy idea that Eloise is alive. It was one of my predictions probably as soon as I found out about Eloise, maybe 3/4 of the way through the book. I just thought, what if Eloise is alive? And Lymond doesn't know this. Richard obviously doesn't know either. And the only person who knows is Margaret Lennox. What if she knows that? How crazy would that be? And then I was reading on the Now You Have Done It blog that basically there was a suggestion that we never find out much about what Richard was saying, because Richard made a comment to Lymond that late at night Eloise said to me ... and Lymond cuts him off. This was in the previous chapter. And then on the Now You Have Done It blog, it is explained that we never really find out what that was about, nor do we get much more information about Eloise in general. I think it was something along those lines. Could probably actually find the exact quote. So the quote was, "The only daughter, the finest child, the most vivid, the most eager, the most intelligent, by now cherished by her own lover with her own children in her arms. Once late at night, when you were away, she told me." That's what Richard had said to Lymond when they were having their heartfelt discussion in the woods last chapter. And then it goes on to explain that basically in this blog, it is kind of explained that we don't really understand, it's not explicitly explained what that is all about, which makes me think that my prediction of Eloise being alive is not true, which also makes me think, because of the way that it was written, that Richard doesn't die throughout the entire series. There are just some things that you can infer from the way people who have read the book talk about certain things that I have to be really careful, and I've decided I'm not going to read any other blogs or listen to anything else whilst I'm reading the rest of this series unless I'm super desperate for an explanation, because I managed to find myself spoiled for lots of things left, right and centre. And whilst I don't mind that Richard lives for the whole series, or at least a good portion of it, I just would like to have not known, because it removes an element of tension. So anyway, my crazy idea of Eloise being alive was always a crazy idea, but now I'm pretty sure that it's definitely not true. Spoilers ended. So Lymond basically, he's such a Lymond. He says, I've got no excuse, but then just goes into a philosophical lecture, which is so perfect. It could not be more perfect. In fact, if he had have gone into a lecture simply defending himself, you're right, that would have kind of been out of character. He's never been that straightforward. He kind of explains his character and his points in such an oblique fashion that everyone's just like, what the fuck was that? So he starts by just saying, on page 530, the margin is so small between life and no life, fact and life, treason and patriotism, civilization and savagery. If you can comprehend it, you have a better right to judge me than I have to plead. I have nothing to add. What a powerful line. That has got to be one of my favourite lines of the book, because Lymond is basically saying, what right do we have to judge another human being if you yourself can judge between the margin of life and no life, fact and lie, treason and patriotism, etc., then there would be no point him pleading, because basically you would be pleading against a god, because surely a god is the only one who can possibly truly know the difference, in which case what is the point of a human pleading to a god? Lymond's basically just throwing it back in their faces, saying, what can you possibly truly know? And it's so beautiful. Of course, Lymond is thinking he's going to die no matter what he says, but he also just helpfully reminds all of the humans on his judgment panel that they are indeed human. It's just very satisfying and so Lymond. The next page though, 531, where he talks about patriotism, which for me is really just a huge metaphor for the dangers of group loyalty and groupthink, and how we often as a society seem to attribute virtue to people who are family men, or loyal to their family, loyal to their friends. We all do that. And Lymond's just saying, well, in time we will admit our relatives and our neighbours, our fellow townsmen, and even perhaps at last our fellow nationals to the threshold of tolerance. But the man living 1 inch beyond the boundary is an inveterate foe. That just sums up all of the stupidity of war, the stupidity of nationalism, of how the Olympics is going on right now at the moment. And I cannot help get past the craziness of how we are so proud of our fellow nationals for winning a gold medal, whereas you are as equally related to that person as someone from another country who's won a gold medal. And it is absolutely silly that we feel pride and loyalty and patriotism towards them and not towards another. You could say it's harmless as well, but then Lymond goes on to say that very harmless feeling of patriotism, what we think is a good thing, that feels is a good thing when you feel it yourself, is a double-edged sword, and that is also responsible for, well, like, so much death and so much destruction and so much war and hatred, and a vehicle for shedding border and exercising surplus power or surplus talents or surplus money. an immature and bigoted intolerance which becomes the coin of barter in the markets of power. Patriotism is a fine hothouse for maggots. It breeds intolerance. It forces a spindle-legged, spurious riot of colour. Jesus, reading out Lymond's words is not an easy task. A man of only moderate powers enjoys the special sanction of purpose, the sense of ceremony, the echo of mysterious, lost and royal things, a trace of the broad, plain, childish virtues of myth and legend and ballad. Lymond is basically saying, yeah, everyone falls into this trap, this enticement of how good you feel when you're patriotic. And so you go to war and people use that feeling. And that feeling drives men to do crazy things. And Lymond has mentioned before, when he was talking to Gideon Somerville, when he was saying that he was at the Battle of Pinky Cleugh, as to how much he hated the how religion drove men to do crazy things. And I'm going to find that line actually, because it's pretty much an echo of what he's saying here. Got it. It's page 364. So Gideon and Lymond are talking, and Lymond asks Gideon, were you at the Battle of Pinky? Lymond says no, and then he says, I was. I thought this was a lie. I've talked about this in a previous video. I'm still confused as to how it's not a lie, but I understand it's not a lie now, and that I was just getting one day mixed up. So Lymond says, I was at the battle. It was as precise an exhibition of honest emotion as you're likely to see. I told you religion was on your side, and that's the bloodiest emotion I know. If this develops into a religious war, then God helps us. So religion being the bloodiest emotion is because it has the same feeling of patriotism and loyalty to the circle we've decided to extend our loyalty to. As in, it's religion is one of the bloodiest group loyalties that exist. And Lymond expressed that back here when he was talking to Gideon Somerville, and then echoes it again in this final speech to the jury. Then he goes on to, turns that around and says, well, who's leading these people? And he questions the goodness of Scottish leadership, or just leadership in general. But in what fashion can this one people be brought to live in full vigour and serenity, and who in their compassion and wisdom will take it and lead it into the path? So Lymond is basically questioning, like, who really is good in the Scottish leadership? Who is worthy of deciding such things? Which is a sort of going back to his question of who really can judge a man's guilt or innocence and still call themselves a human. Is there anyone such perfect being that exists? I think I am probably going to read his last speech here 50 times, because it's just such a perfect argument against what I do think is the greatest evil in the world, and that is, like, group loyalty, which is a good thing because it means that we love our family, but the fact that we don't recognize how much damage it does in the form of, like, nationalism, racism, etc. It's the same feeling, and Lymond is saying that right here, and I love that so much. It's so refreshing and raw, and it's such a basic human truth that I feel barely anyone recognizes, and he's laying it down as essentially his last public words. It's just, I have so much respect for Francis at this point. But I do love how the Lord Advocate kind of goads him into it. Lauder, sorry. He's like, on the bottom of 530, feeling for one's country is not usually considered a freestanding riddle in ethics. And Lymond's like, a riddle in ethics? Let me talk for 5 minutes straight. Don't let him talk about riddles and ethics. You never shut Lymond up. We love it. Yeah, so bottom of 535, so we learn out that Will wins the letters from Palmer, and Thomas is like, I taught Jonathan Crouch to play Tarot, and Will's like, yes, I know, that was satisfying, and that's when I went back and figured that all out. I thought it was quite appropriate, I suppose, for when the letter came and Sibylla, who was obviously not able to sleep. I cannot imagine what Sibylla was feeling in those moments before Tom Erskine came, goodness, it was appropriate, I think, for them to wake Lymond up and say that they have the letter of his innocence, and not play through the entire thing next day publicly. It would have seemed a little contrived to wait until then to sort of talk about it, so I'm glad this happened. And it was a very urgent situation. The letter, though, that Samuel Harvey wrote, it really talks mainly about how he was the one that didn't, lead to the blowing up of the convent, and that he was indeed framed. So that was all explained here. But you know what it didn't say, which I kind of wanted to say, is that he wasn't... Like, his main treason was betrayal at Solway Moss, right? And because that was a complete and utter defeat of the Scots, and Lymond, my understanding was that Lymond was getting blamed partially for that defeat, and this letter doesn't sort of explain anything about Solway Moss here. It kind of just talks about how he was framed as the spy that caused issues for the Scottish at Solway Moss. And that's fine, but I just had to think about that for a little bit because I thought this whole thing was really about Solway. Margaret Lennox, so this is an interesting one, found Lymond, just randomly stumbled across Lymond when Lymond had been taken prisoner in England in 1942. And we are saying that Lymond is, 19 then? 18? Just old enough to obviously be in the Scottish army, so he can't... I don't know what the age is back then when you could join. Probably at least 16, but we're going to say that Lymond was 18 or 19 then, and they run in with each other, and clearly they like each other, or there's some chemistry there, because otherwise why would Margaret have been hanging around him for a while? We still don't know exactly what was happening with Lymond and Margaret. And obviously Margaret liked Lymond and Lymond liked Margaret, and that somehow at some point they secretly got together. Like, what? Yeah, that's not entirely clear exactly what happened. It does talk about how Lymond talks about it, sorry, this is going back a bit. Lymond says, I had access to rooms which should normally have been closed to me. Bedrooms? And Lymond's like, no, not bedrooms, but definitely he had access to some bedroom, a particular bedroom. Lymond explains Margaret as a person of violent, this is page 518, but practical enthusiasms. She wanted a new stimulus and a new experiment. So maybe a part of this was chance, that Margaret really just liked Lymond, was amused by him, wanted him for a bit, and that was partially also what kept him alive, or at least planted the idea that he could be kept alive by being accused of being an English spy. Then Lymond could stay in England for as long as Margaret liked until she got sick of him, I assume. Still not entirely clear. I'm going to have to reread that again later. So Lymond gets woken up in the middle of the night and Will's there. And Lymond is like drugged with opioids. And his reading of the letters, he was so shocked. He was just holding on to the letters for ages and ages. And when he goes back to give them to the advocate, Laudner, Will's like, I had the same reaction as Will. I was like, no, don't trust anyone with those letters, Lymond. But I think Lymond at that point did trust the advocate, because we have to remember that Lymond is a really good reader of character, and I think he's read Laudner as basically someone who has considered his game and is happy with the back and forth, because yes, now we can see that Laudner really just liked the battle, the law, the battle of law, the battle of words, and Laudner was happy to have gotten that with Lymond, and have such a good opponent. So Lymond trusted Laudner with that, because he is at the end of the day a man of the law, and a man of the law is likely to trust evidence. But he goes on to say, you must trust somebody, Will, which is goes back to when he was previously talking to Will about the fact that you are miserable if you trust nobody. And so Lymond's still teaching Will things to Will now, and it really hit when, you know, Scott's like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do now? Like, what are you gonna do tomorrow? Do you wanna go get coffee? And Lymond's just like, wait a moment. It is gradually forcing itself on my consciousness that I am not about to be divided into 4 pieces tomorrow. This is 5:39. Like, Lymond is still just thinking, I am not gonna die. And it must be so unreal to him. And then he just gets dressed and they go see the Queen. And they're just chatting away. And I do enjoy how, like, when they're in front of the Queen is like barely dressed out of bed. Henry Lauder's barely dressed out of bed. Everyone's just pulled on like the clothes that they could find. But Lymond is on page 541. Laudner is like observing, irritably aware of sitting on ruckered linen and surrounded by half-awake and unvaleted statesmen, that Lymond had the knack of being delivered in his garments. So basically he's saying here that Lymond looks more put together than any one of them, which makes no sense. He should be the one that's basically got bed hair and scruff on his chin and shaking from relief, but Lymond is the most composed of everyone. And all I can say is this: I conclude at the end of this book that Lymond's greatest sin is vanity. 100%. He is so vain. My second favourite part of this, like I said, I had 2 favourite parts of this chapter, was bottom of 541, which was the Queen, and a private audience with the Queen, because I was wondering, where is the Queen in all of this? Surely she knows exactly what's going on with this extremely high profile case. She wasn't at the hearing yesterday, so the fact that she's gotten out of bed after being presented this evidence, I think it's appropriate, and I really liked that. And we get the circle back with how Lymond was involved with her daughter, and how Lymond seems to have had a big impact on the little baby Queen, with just how lovely he was when he was playing around with her and singing with her, because this Queen has never had a father. Never. Yeah, the bottom paragraph of 541, where the Queen basically says, we now know that we owe to you other gifts of money and of secrets over the years, and that we have had ignorantly the use of your talents, as in they've had Lymond's talents used, but they didn't know that it was Lymond doing it. So satisfying. And your abilities at Hume and at Harriet, at Carlisle and Dumbarton being the most recent one, with the Queen managing to escape. All these services formed beneath the edge of our sword and below the heel of our boot, performed with vigour and wit and independence. So the Queen here is basically acknowledging all of Lymond's pain and trouble, and truly seeing and understanding how hard it must have been for him, that he was doing all of this knowing that he was hated by the Scottish government and hunted by them, yet did it anyway with independence and proactivity and courage and vigour. It's just, I'm gonna have to read that a few times. Right now I'm still a bit raw and hurting. And then the Queen is like, on the next couple of pages, on the last page, 543, are you with me? And Lymond's like, yes, I think so. Because I was thinking, after that speech he's given about patriotism, I wouldn't expect Lymond to be like, yes, for Scotland, let's go. So he says, yes, I think so. There is a divine solution, but we are only human. It just, everything he says is just so perfectly tying together. So he says, I think so. There is a divine solution, in that one that humans will never know in our existential conquests throughout our lifetime, both great and small. Lymond is admitting here that in the meantime, because he is only human, he's going to do what he can for his country. But the fact that he says, I think so, I don't know, maybe I would have preferred if Lymond, instead of saying, yes, I think so, just said, there is a divine solution, but we are only human. Because yeah, I definitely, after everything that he has done and said, I don't think, even though he is on the Scottish side and not the English, I think overall he is on the side of humanity, and on the side that is against idiocy and stupidity. And so it would have been good if he said, I'm on the side of something greater. But, you know, then he admits that we are only human and I'm not a god. So he can only do his next best step, and that is probably to continue to protect things he does love, like his family and Richard and Mariota. The very end, with Lymond going to see his mother in that empty room, was, my first thought was, why wasn't Sibylla there with everyone else? Did she ask not to be? That doesn't make any sense. Why was she waiting in a separate room to receive Lymond? Was it because she knew that perhaps Lymond would have needed that someone there to be with him, and it was just a nice way for him to kind of finally exhale the breath that he has been holding for the past 6 years whilst he's been accused of such awful things? And so maybe Sibylla thought, I won't go there, I'll be ready there waiting so that I can comfort him or something like that. So, but it was kind of weird. I was like, why wasn't she there with the Queen to receive Lymond? Anyway, I also loved how when Lymond came in and everyone's like hot and tired, and then Richard smiled, this on page 541. Richard smiled. Crawford of Lymond, standing just inside the doorway, smiled back, bowed, and remained where he was, in himself a novelty and a force to the considering gaze lifted to him. Yeah, he is very much a novelty, because people are not expecting this person that they have thought was a traitor this whole time to suddenly be probably the most honest and courageous person in this whole circle of people in the Scottish nobility or government. He's not in the government, he's in nobility, and there is a difference, and I don't fully understand the exact politics of Scotland back then, but Richard and Lymond smiling at each other. Richard finally knows the truth about Eloise as well, because he didn't kind of know that totally before then, but he's now seen the letters from Samuel Harvey, so Richard is finally like, oh my god, everything about Lymond that I thought was a lie. So finally we've got that, because before Richard still thought that Lymond, I mean, it was through Lymond's mistake that Eloise died. Technically, if Lymond hadn't have written that letter, then she wouldn't have died, but that's such an impossible thing to predict that at this point it's hard to really hold it over his head that much. He was truly trying to help the Scottish government as much as he could. You know, he was doing it all with good intentions. Definitely the last line though was just so, like my heart is squeezed really tight. At the bottom of 543, we do get Lymond's POV here, and it says, as soon as he sees Sibylla, a wild relief that deluged the tired and passionate mind. So we finally see Lymond for the first time ever dropping his guard and letting his crazy, fatigued but yet runaway passionate mind with 1,000 thoughts going at once, he finally lets that go and just be Francis, the son of Sibylla, and Sibylla saw her son's eyes and flung open her arms. I can't actually say that without smiling, because if I don't smile, I will tear up. I did tear up at the end of this book. It's hard to tear up in front of a camera, but believe me, I did. I'm going to not think about that for a while. Such a brilliant book, and I cannot believe that I picked this book up on a whim from a recommendation of another author who I like. So that's just crazy. I probably have so much more to say, but I think that's enough for this video, for this chapter, and I'm so excited I've got 5 more books to read. But finishing the first book is so hard, so now I know how hard it's going to be to finish the 6th book. But I don't even own all the books yet. I need to buy them, and they're hard to source. Like, they're not the easiest. You can't get them at shops. You have to buy them online and hope that they arrive. So I'm gonna have a break between finishing this book and starting The Queen's Play, only because I think I psychologically need a break and read something easier just for a bit. and because I want to have that natural break to have this sink in a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't look at stuff online because of spoilers, so it's all just in my head going around and around, but I do want to have a break, so probably, I don't know how long, but I will be reposting videos on the Queen's Play pretty soon. In the meantime, I do have a fun video planned where I'm going to do a character breakdown and character alignment breakdown of all of the characters that we've seen and loved in this book. So that's going to be fun to do. I kind of want to do that now, but I'm going to give it a day or so. And I'm also going to put up an actual overall review of this book for people who have not read it, because it's really hard to find reviews on this book without spoilers, and if people are out there wanting to read it and they just want a review that is going to be spoiler free, I want to provide that so that more people can get into it. So I'm going to do that as well. So I'm sure I'll see you around. And also thank you all for watching, because it's kept me going. Making these videos is fine. It's the editing that drives me mad, and sometimes I'm just like, oh, I just want to read the next book, but I'm like, no, I'm going to put this up. I'm committed to this. It's been really encouraging, is what I'm trying to say, is to get back your shared joys and delights at a shared love, and sharing that in someone, just with people that I don't know and I know I'll never meet. It makes this whole experience such a beautiful thing. Because reading something that you like in a vacuum is lonely. It really is. And I've now don't feel lonely at all. So thank you very much. And I will see you soon. And I will leave you with the sentiment from the Queen Dowager of Scotland, Marie de Guise, I believe is how you pronounce that. When she was talking about how, to her, Lymond is a double good thing, because he has done so much for Scotland, but also has literally saved her more time that she can spend with her daughter, and her daughter the Queen. Like, this is the mother of the Queen. She's speaking from a mother's point of view when she says to Lymond, when she tells Lymond of how grateful she is for the particular act of him stopping that message getting through to Lord Grey, so that her daughter can safely get to France, so that she can continue to be alive and happy, so that she can spend more time with her daughter. And that's just such a simple reason. And so this is the sentiment I'll leave you with. And I echo this sentiment on page 554. "My dear Mr. Crawford," said the Queen Dowager, "how can I forget when my daughter recites scurrilous poetry and holds you still dear to her heart?"
That's all.
Union, which exposed the
That's all.
exploitation.
That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all.